All right, we are picking up with the book of Genesis in our exposition course. Just by way of explanation, Ken, since we only got into chapter 11, or up to chapter 11 in our survey of Genesis in Exposition 113, I thought that I would like to try to take the second semester and finish it off. So instead of spending all our time in the book of Isaiah, as we would normally do, we're going to just continue on with Genesis. However, because Isaiah is the required study material, I will be giving you some assignments for you to study Isaiah on your own. And that way, we can do both at once. So it will make the course slightly heavier, but it will allow us to get into those really important principles that we will be studying under the lives of the patriarchs. By the way, what is the outline that we are using as a basis for our study for the book of Genesis? So we have learned that outline after 16 weeks. The two major headings are, let's start with P. Chapters what to what of the primeval period? Genesis chapters 1 to 11. The primeval period. And this is how some of you were spelling it. The primeval period. I can't believe that that's how you guys interpreted that word. At least three of you spelled it that way. And I don't know how it made any sense to you. The primeval period. Four major events. Right? It's not primeval. That means the most evil period. Primeval is spelled primeval. So I don't want to mark another test paper where that is spelled. Right? Primeval period. I think the two words mean quite a bit different. Primeval and primeval. Okay, so the four events are chapters 1 and 2. First one, creation. Next one, fall, chapters 3 to 5. Some of you would put chapter 3 down and skip to chapter 6 for the next one. Blood, chapters 6 to 9. And then Babel, chapters 10 and 11. Alright, and then the second major heading to the book of Genesis, chapters 12 to 13, has to do with the patriarchs. Right? So it's notice how this is spelled, please. Patriarchal. I had one person tell me that this is the patriotic period. I just thought that was humorous. Patriotic period. Doesn't have much to do with patriotism. Okay, instead of four major events, we have four major people. It's obvious, right? But that's the outline that we are using as a basis for our study, and if you haven't learned it, you should. Actually, I think when we first looked at this outline, we made the break in chapter 11, verse 9. Right? we took that 11:10, starting with the generations of Shem, as bringing us up to Abraham. So actually, we made the break at 11:9 and began the patriarchal period at chapter 11, verse 10. That's more precisely it. Okay? Now, the requirements for the course. I'll divide them into their two divisions, the requirements for the Isaiah and the requirements for Genesis. The book of Isaiah, I want you to read it one time during the course. Now, the related assignments to the book will require you to read it one time, so it's not as if you have to sit down and do an extra reading on it. There are at least two assignments that I want you to do for the book of Isaiah. One is that I want you to make your own detailed outline of the book. And I'll explain the purpose for this assignment. The reason I want you to outline the book of Genesis, and I want you to do that from exposition. The reason I want you to do that is because it forces you to think analytically as you read. In other words, to try to evaluate while you're reading what it is saying. Right? It forces you to express your thoughts, and that is an important procedure that each of you need to develop further. And so a detailed outline to the book of Isaiah means that you may want to use Philip's outline for a basis. I don't care. I'm not expecting you to come up with anything necessarily all that original for your 1 to 35 is clearly a division, and chapters 36 to 39 is clearly a division, and chapter 40 to 66 is clearly the third division. So if you want to use Baxter's or Phillips' outline as a basis for this, fine. Right? What I want is for you to subdivide every verse in the book and categorize it somehow under those major headings. I want you to see it yourself as you read through the book of Isaiah. Okay? That will be an education all in itself, and it will familiarize you with the material in Isaiah like no other assignment would do. Okay, so that's the purpose for it. This will force you to familiarize yourself with what Isaiah is about. And we're talking about. I don't want you to give me a 4 or even a 10-line outline. I'm talking about breaking it down verse by verse, and you may end up with an outline that's 3 pages long, for example, because you're going to categorize every verse in the book. And so that's a detailed assignment, and I'm going to give you all semester to do it, so you can start working on it immediately. But you can, and to make it easier to start out with, I would say go ahead and use somebody else's major outline. Just the 3 major points somebody provided for you. Okay. Try to alliterate it if you can without violating the meaning of words. You know what I mean by alliterate. Try to get headings to start with the same letter or end with the same sound or something. Now that's not a requirement, but it is a good mental exercise, and it will help you remember your outline too. I mean, that's the purpose for alliteration. Just while we're on that subject, when we take exegesis in this course, I'll be teaching you how to outline passages. There are procedures to follow, black and white procedures that we follow to break down a passage into separate segments of thought, and then you look for a unifying principle that you can relate each different idea to, and then you restate each of your statements in terms of that unifying principle, and you come up with a cohesive outline, something that this point is related to this point, is related to the next point, but at least the different points are all indicated. So that's what you're looking for in a good outline. And if any of you want me to go over you with that, come see me and I'll discuss it with you briefly, so that you have that with you as you do your outline for Isaiah. Any questions about the outline assignment?
Just this every verse in the head, you want the first place to talk about it, or how do you want to do it?
Yeah, I would say that I want you at least to be able to relate individual verses, if necessary, to your headings. I couldn't think of an individual verse is going to make it a phenomenally long thing. What I don't want is merely for you to simply put a chapter down. Okay, so make it
virtually. Don't just stand out as an eight quote that they stand out towards another one. So you can end up in a lot of subdivisions.
Yeah, I want you to at least subdivide chapters. At least go that detailed, all right? You won't necessarily have to go every verse in every chapter, but at least if you have, for example, a chapter division, right, then subdivide it. For example, use chapter 53 in Isaiah. We all know what Isaiah 53 is about. Okay, well, part of the chapter has to do with Christ's earthly, his who he was like prior, like while he was growing up, and then part of the chapter has to do with what he did on the cross, and part of the chapter has to do with his resurrection, his burial. Part of it has to do with his resurrection. So if you made that many divisions of chapter 53, that'd be 4 divisions of chapter 53, right? Then that would be sufficient. Yeah, so you comprehend what the chapter was about. Okay? Right? That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. Okay. The other assignment for the book of Isaiah, I'll give you a choice. But this is, I'll give you a choice. Either I want you to summarize one major theme in the book. This will be a topical study. Summarize one major theme in the book. Let me give you a few examples from which you can, and if you can think of something else in the book, then that would clear it with me, and you may be able to do that. One could be the Christological message. What does the book of Isaiah teach about Christ? Now, I already gave you that assignment in synthesis, right? And what I got back from most people was a list of references. Right, okay, and I didn't require anything more. I didn't say that I wanted anything more, all right? What I am looking for in this particular assignment is some analysis and synthesis of that particular data. If you've already done your Christological, if you've already picked out those passages in the book of Isaiah, if you want to do this passage, what you should do with it is refine it and put it in some kind of summary form, right? either summarize Christ's work chronologically or topically, all right, or in terms of relationships with the different groups of people affected or whatever. Right? So there's all kinds of stuff in the book of Isaiah. It's the most Christological book in the Old Testament we study in synthesis. Right? And if you would like, for your own benefit, and it would be a tremendous thing to do, I mean, that would be a good assignment for you because it would help familiarize you with stuff about Christ in the Old Testament that you are not yet familiar with. If you were ever to meet a Jew, that would be the stuff that you'd want to remember. You would want to use your New Testament if you don't accept the New Testament. You would want to remember everything you could from the Old Testament about Christ. Right? So that would be a tremendous assignment to do. In fact, originally I thought I would give it to you as a separate assignment, but I think I won't. Right? You can choose to do either the Christological summary from Isaiah, or you could choose to do a summary on the millennial kingdom from Isaiah. Or you could choose to do a summary of the nature of Israel's sin. The nature of Israel's sin. What I'm thinking of in terms of this thing is that all reasons Israel's sin is greatly amplified by the prophet. You know, God explains, you have done this and you have done that and this and that, and he uses illustrations and parallels. He says your sin is like this, and you may wish to basically do a little study on hamartiology from the book of Isaiah, for example. Sin is this. We use one of those verses in Isaiah as a basic verse for hamartiology. Isaiah 64:6. All our righteousnesses are as filthy rags in his sight. We use that as a present day commentary on sin, don't we? And so Isaiah has a great deal to say about sin. Right? He says it's like adultery, for example. That's one parallel that he uses. Right? So you may want to do that. Another theme is divine sovereignty. You may want to summarize divine sovereignty. That is not the same thing as the millennial kingdom study. The millennial kingdom is specifically that future 1,000-year period in which Israel will be restored to her place, and the Gentiles will be subjugated under the righteous hand of the king, right? And that there will be peace and prosperity, and the curse will be lifted, and all that kind of stuff. That's all found in Isaiah. Divine sovereignty has to do with the divine purpose and the inability of anyone else to change or annul it. And that is a major theme in Isaiah. Divine sovereignty. That God does what he wills and no one else can change it. And the divine sovereignty is related to many minor themes. It's related to judgment, it's related to the other nations, it's related to kings, it's related to people's objections to him. It's all kinds of ways in which sovereignty fits in. I don't suppose it's as large a theme as some of the others. The divine sovereignty. There are tremendous passages on that in the book. I can give you one right now. Let me read you one. Isaiah. I'm out of it today. Isaiah 14. This passage is always stuck in my head. Isaiah 14:24. The Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass. As I have purposed, so shall it stand. I will break the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, his burden depart from off their shoulders. This is the purpose that is purposed on the whole earth. This is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has purposed, and who shall annul it? And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? That's divine sovereignty. Okay? And chapters 43, 44, 45, and 46. And chapter 66. There are just major sections in the book that are totally devoted to this. Okay? And by the way, I think today that in our society, the reason I think that you should consider this as an important subject to study is because the church needs to hear about divine sovereignty. Let's make it practical. Most Christians don't act as if God matters a hoot. Christians are talking about. And divine sovereignty needs to be hammered away at the pulpits and in the classes in which Christians work. So that's an important thing. All right, another sub-theme to choose from is the subject of salvation. What does Isaiah teach us about God's salvation? Again, there would be some overlap with your study on Christ, but the doctrine of salvation is a little broader than just that which relates to Christ. There would be many salvation passages that don't mention Christ. And salvation has to do with physical salvation as well as eternal salvation and national salvation. See? So, if you want to study salvation from the book of Isaiah, that would be a possible. Another possible theme to do from Isaiah is a historical summary. Simply go through the book and point out the historical sections. How does this relate to the history of the Old Testament? Now, I hope you don't think that I'm trying to kill you with assignments here. What I am trying to do is to give you enough choice to whereby you can pick something that you will find meaningful. I want you to see that this book of Isaiah, even though we are not going to spend our class periods on it this semester, is nevertheless a very significant book. And these assignments are intended to stress that. Who said that?
Oh, I heard it earlier. You said it.
Well,
It looks good though. They really.
Second semester is different from the first semester. I mean, there's none of this psychological barrier to overcome.
Some of these would like to do more.
All right, so a detailed outline of Isaiah plus one of these topical assignments. That's what you're required, as well as to read the book of Isaiah one time. So I wouldn't worry about the reading part. You'll get that as you do these assignments. Now, for the book of Genesis, your assignments. What? For the book of Genesis. Well, some of you have had it. Well, there's two people that have gotten some of them in, but I told you a few weeks back you wouldn't have to do them, so if you haven't done them, you should have to do them. And if you want to read that, you can. Let me just give them to you. All right? There is one additional assignment for Genesis that I decided that I'm going to give you. That is, I want a timeline from you on the patriarchs. A timeline on the patriarchs with significant ages and dates. Yeah, with significant ages and dates. And I want you to take it from the data given in the book of Genesis. Now, I did this one time, and it was one of the most thrilling studies I've ever done in the Old Testament. I lost it. I don't know where it is, and I've got to redo it. And I want you to do it. Right? It requires going through the book of Genesis with a blank sheet of paper and a pen, and finding a reference where it says, and Abraham was in the land of Canaan 10 years, and he turned 80 years old, or 90 years old. And then you'll go to another place, and it says that on Ishmael's 14th birthday, Isaac was circumcised. Well, if you put two and two together, how old was Abraham at that particular time? And you can correlate stuff like this, and you can flesh a story out that otherwise is unseen.
Do you want us to coordinate that back with what we've done in timeline up to
To my knowledge, there isn't a method of connecting the two. Yeah, it's just the patriarchs. Right? We're stressing Genesis 12 to 50. Okay? The other assignment was a good assignment because it shows the interrelationships prior to the flood. Right? This one here shows you the interrelationships after the flood. You will be able to tell, by the way, how old Abraham was when Joseph was born. Abraham. Or, no, he was dead. How old Abraham would have been when Joseph was born. How old his father was, because it doesn't actually say. And how long Joseph was in the land before his father sent him out. How old do you picture Joseph when his father Jacob sent him out with his special robe to check on his brothers? How old do you think he was? You think so? Some people picture him as 8 or 9 years old. Some people picture him as a teenager. I'm not going to tell you. But you should be able to figure that out from the data given to you in the book of Genesis. And it's like a detective story, you know. It's an interesting thing. Okay? That is going to be one of the most interesting assignments you'll do for Genesis. Okay? A timeline of the patriarchs. And then to those, I'll simply add the other ones, carry over from first semester. Lessons on faith from the life of Abraham. If you haven't done that, then you'll have to do that. Okay. And the types of Genesis 24. And a little paper on reaping what you sow. The principle of reaping what you sow is illustrated in the life of Jacob.
that is all of
Yeah, I'm simply giving you the other assignments. And then finally, parallels between Christ and Joseph. So there's one specific assignment for each of the patriarchs: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Okay.
And when we cover these,
I haven't given a specific due date for these. I would like them in by the time that we finish. And if we again get bogged down, well, I want them all in before the end of the course. Right. So.
yeah, the reason is because we do the research on it, and there's so much more we pick up in the back that our papers just feel incomplete.
That in itself is there's method to the madness. The reason for that is for you to begin to see that your powers of observation need to be developed. You know, and that's one of the ways to do it.
I like to research it prior to do my outline, and then at the end of the process,
Add to it.
I think I can just throw the stuff.
Powers of recall are great. Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's where we're going in exposition 114. Now, since you have a few minutes left this morning, we haven't quite finished Babel. We kind of set the stage for it by giving you an outline of the 2 chapters. I was disappointed nobody remembered the outline for Babel. um, that we had studied in class. Chapter 10 was the division of the families of the earth into nations by propagation. Divisions into nations by propagation. And chapter 11, verses 1 to 9, was the division of the nations of the earth into languages by punishment. And that was our outline. Right? And 11, 1 to 9. Oh. Yeah. So the first, chapter 10 is the division of the families of the earth into nations by propagation. And then 11, 1 to 9 is the division of the nations of the earth into languages. So families are first divided into nations, and then the nations are divided into languages. To me, that simplifies the whole summary. If you can remember that, makes the ideas clear. The first was a natural thing, and it was in accordance with God's commands given in Eden. There's nothing wrong with it. God intended that the families of the earth be divided into nations. He wanted that. He expected it. All right? He had said to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Right? Have 6 kids. Right? Right? To sin, not to have kids. Right? It's contrary to the Bible. All right? That was just a little side remark, and don't pay any attention to that. In chapter 11, however, the division of nations into languages is a negative factor. This was disobedience. God had said, fill the earth. And instead of filling the earth, they were what? They were centralizing that instead of spreading out and using the resources that God had created. Instead of exercising the dominion that God had given to him in the beginning, they were perverting dominion, and they were building a vertical dominion rather than a horizontal. Understand that? God had expected them to have dominion this way. Instead, they were coming together and building dominion this way. So that was the sin of Babel. So let's just survey that little portion this morning, the first 9 verses. And then this will be all the time to spend on it. In verses 1 to 4 in chapter 11, we have the world's condition. The world's condition. And we could summarize those points into 3 or 4 points. They were, in verse 1, completely united in language and speech. So completely united in language. And they were completely settled and unified in location. In verses 3 and 4, they were unified in purpose and rebellion. They were unified in purpose and rebellion. Verse 3 describes their cooperation in gathering raw materials. Verse 4 shows their cooperation in construction of the city and tower for idolatrous purposes. I just came up with an alliteration for this. Unified in purpose and rebellion. Okay. Okay, so I'll just break this down a little differently then. Verses 3 and 4 shows us their unified purpose and rebellion. Verse 3 shows, discusses extraction of raw materials. Verse 4 is construction. Of the city and tower. Second part of verse 4 talks about their religion, self-glory, honoring man. And the last part of verse 4 describes their rebellion.
That's the last part of it.
Yeah. Verses 5 through 9 shows, verses 1 to 4 show the world's condition. Verses 5 to 9 shows God's response. Well, I should come up with a different word, but for now we'll use that one. God's response. Right? Let's read it. The whole earth, verse 1, was of one language and one speech. Right? So they're unified in speech. The whole earth here. Obviously, it's talking about the inhabitants of the earth rather than the elements of the earth, because elements have nothing to do with the language, only people, right? So it's talking about the whole inhabited earth. All the people were united in language and speech. Verse 2, it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Right? So they're completely united in location. Now this is part of the problem. Instead of spreading out and filling the earth, they come together, right? Now 3 times in the next 2 verses you have the statement, they said. It's in the first part of verse 3. They said one to another. It's in the first part of verse 4. They said, come, let us build a city. I thought it was 3 times. I guess it's only 2 times. Let us is found 3 times. In verse 3 it says, let us make brick. In verse 4 it says, let us build a city. In verse 4b it says, let us make a name. Make us a name. Alright. And so we see a progression here. Unity of speech, communications. Then there's unity in location. Then there's the unity of purpose, and it was a negative purpose. They said one to another, first of all, let's extract raw materials. Come, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And so they had brick for stone and slime for mortar. We're talking about industry here. You know, great preparations and cooperation. Preparation. Verse 4, we have their construction, and they said, come, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach to heaven, and let us make us a name. Right. So the second step after preparation and extraction of raw materials is construction. Let us build us a city and tower whose top may reach to heaven. Now, when I was a kid, I always thought, wow, they must have been successful. They must have built something that was about 10 miles high. It went right up into heaven, and that's why God got angry, because they poked a hole in his heaven. You know, that was my kid's view of the Tower of Babel. Right? I don't think it's necessary to understand it that way now. What do you think what do you think it's saying? Instead of literally poking a hole into God's place of abode, what do you think it's describing? Certainly, it was like a pimple on God's otherwise beautiful earth, you know, place of poison, that it was raised up and, you know, a sore spot. It was kind of picturing the fact that it was a high tower. God had forbade, what God later was to forbade Moses and the people of Israel ever from building high towers for worship, because it seems as if that it was always associated with perversion, perverted morals, and perverted religion, a high place.
Well, this tower is a long possible mission, for the battle, the one bill, the ice and all that's
something like that. The actual name for them is a ziggurat. Yeah. And they have discovered those things over in Chaldea. I'm not sure if they've discovered the actual one that that these people were using here, but they have discovered remnants. I mean, even the Maya and Incan civilizations in Central America had ziggurats. Right? They're big, long pyramid sort of buildings, you know, with steps going up one side. Right? So you ascend up into the heavens, and they would do their sacrifices and offerings on top. Right? And they've discovered ziggurats. Right? And to all intents and purposes, archaeology has confirmed the existence of high towers in false worship, if they haven't discovered the actual one. Now, there is one particularly large one over there that could be the one that Genesis 11 refers to. Who knows? Right? Anyway, the point is that their united effort to extract raw materials and preparation, and then to construct a city and then a tower, you know, a center of worship, whose top would reach into heaven. In their minds, the idea is for us to supplant God. See the parallel here in the human desire to get up into heaven their own way, as opposed to God saying, you go out and you can walk in fellowship with me where you are. Human religion has perverted motives. Satan said, I will exalt myself above God on God's throne in heaven. So it's always, one of the characteristics of false religions is always to get to God, or to remove yourself from your responsible place where God has put you, and to exalt yourself through your own efforts. And this is exactly what Babel pictures: human effort trying to exalt themselves into God's abode. Let's go up into heaven. All right? Yeah. So Babel is significant because it describes perfectly all false religion, human attempts to reach God their own way in rebellion against God's explicit commands. Right? So there's extraction of raw materials, there's construction